Hello, everyone, and welcome to our online message platform. We're so excited that you've decided to join us today. If you're new to Inland Hills Church, we are so excited that you are here with us today, and we want to get to know you a little bit more. So please take a moment to click the link below the video. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how we could be praying for you this week. If you call Inland Hills home, thank you for your continued partnership in giving with us today. You can continue to do so by visiting inlandhills.com/give. Now we are about to dive into an exciting message, and we just want to invite you to lean into the words that you are about to hear. It is our hopes that these words and this message uplifts you during the week ahead and just encourages you throughout whatever you are facing.
In the fall of 2003, I somehow persuaded my brother and three of my friends to go and get scuba certified with me. We really hadn't ever done that before, except just like in a Discover Scuba class I'd had on my honeymoon, and I thought it'd be really fun if we all learned to do it. And so there was a classroom piece of it. You had to learn some different things and procedures and kind of memorize some charts. And then there was also what they called an open water dive experience that you had to have in order to make it. And so our instructor, his name was Jason. We went out to this East Texas lake, and it was later in the fall, so the water temperature was in the 50s, and it was pretty cold, which means you had to wear a wetsuit. But we were also very young and very poor. We were all in college age at the time, so we couldn't afford to buy any of our own equipment. We needed to come up and rent a wetsuit from the lake that we were diving at. They had a whole shop there, dive shop locally. So we went into the dive shop that day, and it's 5 of us, and we all need wetsuits, and it turns out they didn't have enough for all of us. So they didn't have us in our size. Like my friend Chris weighed about 325 pounds, and he needed a triple extra large wetsuit, but all they had was a double extra large wetsuit. And so he says, "Sir, I'm really sorry. We just don't have one in your size. All we have is this one, and it's going to be too small." And he said, "Give me that wetsuit. I got this." So he took the wetsuit, and he went. They had a porta potty you could change in. So he went to the porta potty, closed the door, and it sounded like construction was happening in there. Just boom, 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 off all the sides. And finally he came out, and man, that wetsuit looked like it was spray painted on. The metal tangs in the back were just clinging together for dear life. And he said, "I got this." So we're like, "Oh, awesome." And then my friend Daniel was smaller, and they didn't have a male wetsuit in his size. All they had was one for a female. So he went in and changed, and it's shaped like a female. So he came back out, and we noticed he was a lot hippier when he came out than he was before. And that worked out. And then I rented one, my friend Dave and my brother Caleb, we were all able to rent ours. And then we started. It was just one bad thing after another that day. Chris had gotten a weight belt because when you wear a wetsuit, the neoprene makes you buoyant, makes you go to the surface. So you have to wear a weight belt in order to get underneath the water. And then you wear a vest called a BC that fills up with air so that you can control your buoyancy in the water. And that's one of the things you're out there practicing when you do an open water dive. So the idea is that you are neutral and that you don't, touch the bottom of the lake, because that could get a bunch of sand and dirt up. Then you'd have to pause the dive, and it would take a while. So we swim out to the middle of the lake, and then Jason, our instructor, slowly starts to let air out of his vest, and we all start to do that so we can go underwater. Well, because Chris's wetsuit had been stretched so thin, it turns out he didn't need near as much weight on his weight belt as what he'd put on. So as soon as he let the air out of his vest, just like a meteor crashing to the earth, just made a huge impact at the bottom of the lake, and dirt went everywhere. So first we had to all get out and wait for a while all the dirt settled back down. Then we started to go again, and you have to equalize your ears. So when you go about 8, 9, 10 feet down, if you've ever done that in a swimming pool, even if you've never gone diving, you've probably noticed there's pressure on your ears. And the way to get that pressure out of your ears is to equalize them. It's you blow through your nose, but you pinch your nose so that instead of the air coming out your nose, it equalizes your ears. Well, my brother somehow wasn't doing that right. I know that doesn't sound hard. He's always been a kind man, but he wasn't great at this. And so he tried to do it, but he couldn't do it. And so then he made a horrible face. He scrunched it up, and it looked more like he was trying to use the bathroom than equalize his ears. And then he did it so hard that he burst his eardrum. So he's got pus and gross stuff running out of his ear. And we probably should have all called it a day, but we'd paid money for this. So Caleb, you go sit over there, and the rest of us are going to finish up. So he does, so he goes, and the rest of us do it. And then me and my friend David finish, and we get out, and we're standing next to the fire. We'd built a little fire there because it was so chilly outside, and Dave got a little too close, and so his wetsuit started to melt. The knee pads started sliding and becoming unglued from the neoprene. And then I look over, and my friend Daniel, who is in the female wetsuit, it's filled with water now, so now he gets out, and he's got boobs, and he's walking toward us, and Chris and my brother's just aching in pain, and it was just an awful, terrible day. But if you look at photos from that day, we're like, Like really, the pictures do not tell the actual story. And that's because as a society, we are getting better and better at faking it. Increasingly, it feels like we live our lives in fish bowls. Like everybody can see, and we've got social media. People can see what it is that we're up to. There's video cameras on us all the time in every establishment we eat in. I was even telling my son Jack this a couple days ago, and we were at a pizza place locally. It doesn't matter which one. And I said, so like we're probably being recorded right now by cameras. And he was like, "Are you serious, Dad?" I was like, "Yeah, can you find one?" So he looks at me and says, "Oh, there's a camera right there. There's another one." Dad, they're watching us. He's 6, right? He's figuring this out. People are watching us all the time. And we, for our part, want to look like we have it all together. And so we fake it. We put pictures online that don't actually tell the whole story. And we try to convince everybody else that our lives are a little more put together than they really are. But what's worse than faking it to other people is that sometimes we fake it so well to others that we start to fake ourselves out also. We start to believe the lie that we've got it all together. And when we start to believe that lie, we actually have less trust for ourselves and then less trust for the people around us. In fact, Stephen Covey, a business writer, in The Speed of Trust says this: often we make commitments to ourselves, such as setting goals or making New Year's resolutions, that we fail to fulfill. And as a result, we come to feel that we can't even fully trust ourselves. Like we lie to ourselves about this. How many of you, all right, let's have church for a second, do some confessions. How many of you ever made a New Year's resolution that you haven't kept? Yeah. Studio, just so you know, that was about this whole room, except we have about 10 people in here who are total liars. Okay, so he goes on to say, if we can't trust ourselves, we'll have a hard time trusting others. This personal incongruence is often the source of our suspicions of others. Another way of saying this, in other words, like lying to ourselves convinces us that others are lying to us, right? When we find that we can't even hold up the thing that we promised ourselves we would do, we start to believe that maybe everyone is a bit suspect, right? If we're suspect, surely everyone else is. And so it lowers trust in our relationships when we don't follow through with ourselves. It lowers trust with other people when we spot ourselves lying to ourselves, faking it. So what are some signs of this? Like, how can you know that this is happening to you? I mean, why do we lie to ourselves? Like, at the end of the day, what's beneath that? Why? And there's a few possible reasons. Let's just talk through a few. We lie to ourselves about all kinds of stuff. Like, we lie to ourselves about changes we need to make. Of course we do. Why would we do that? Well, because it's way easier to pretend that you don't need to make a change than to actually make a change. Psychologists say that it takes about 70 days to form a habit. Like, you have to do that thing every day for over 2 months in order for that habit to really be formed inside of you. That's a lot of work. And so if you ever found yourself at the beginning of a year, promise, like, I'm going to go to the gym 3 times a week or 5 times a week or whatever it is, or I'm going to lose 20 pounds. That's what I'm going to do. And that first week, you do it. You go to the gym 3 times. You feel great about yourself. Week 2, you do it 2 times. You're like, well, that was pretty good. I'll get back on track next week. Week 3, you go 1 time. Week 4, you go, I've already messed up so bad, I might as well just not exercise the rest of the year. So that's how you slowly get there. But it's easy to pretend that you don't need to make change at all. It's way harder to actually make the change. And so we lie to ourselves. We fake it. We pretend that thing that we don't really love about ourselves, that thing that we once said we should fix, maybe it's not that big a deal after all. So we just push it down. Another thing, self-image destroyers. You have a particular idea of yourself. In fact, all of us do. And so when there's a different behavior that you spot that seems to be opposed to the image you have of yourself, you can sometimes just fake yourself out, lie about it. About 6 years ago, a friend of mine had an affair on his wife, and he confessed it to her, and he confessed it to us. No one had known about it. And I was just talking to him the week that he confessed it, and he was committed to doing everything he could to try to save his marriage. He bought things for her. She went to go stay with her mom. He went and sat outside of her mom's house overnight, slept out there all night long because she wouldn't answer his calls and she wouldn't come to the door. And he was like, I care about you so much. I just want to be here. I'll be here whenever you come out. Like, that was the attitude he had. He had the attitude of, you think I need counseling? I'll get counseling. You think we need to go to marriage therapy? We'll go to marriage therapy. Whatever it takes. I want to do everything I can. And he just owned it. I messed up. This was my mistake. I'm the one who completely blew it. A few weeks later, she took him back with a lot of stipulations. Like, we've got to work on this. We've got to go see a counselor. We've got to see a therapist. I talked to him again about it 6 months later, and I just asked him, hey, how are things going? He said, not good. They started going to a counselor, a therapist, and he said, you know, the therapist keeps telling me I've got stuff to work on. It's the same stuff my wife is saying. It feels like the two of them are teaming up against me. And I don't feel like anyone actually understands my side of anything. And she's starting to treat me like she was treating me shortly before I had this affair. You know, that's the reason I ended up sleeping with somebody else. Because she wasn't being very kind to me. She wasn't fulfilling my needs emotionally. She wasn't fulfilling my needs physically. That's what drove me into this. And in the span of 6 months, this guy went from, it's all my fault, I own it all, I'm the one who made the mistake, to, it's all her fault, she did this to me, she's the reason that the affair happened. Why? Because all of us tend to believe that at our core, we are good. And yes, we make mistakes, and yes, we mess up, but we really believe that deep down inside, who we really are is good. And so if we start to see things in ourselves that aren't good, we have to figure out a way to explain those things away. And if something's going to conflict with our own self-image and cause us cognitive dissonance, that's just when something we see conflicts with what we believe to be true. It's a cognitive dissonance. Our mind has to figure out a way to solve that problem. I believe this, but I'm seeing this. What do I do with that? So sometimes we just tell ourselves oh, actually it wasn't my fault. What I did was completely understandable given what she did. And so we fake it. We lie to ourselves. We tell ourselves something that isn't real. We lie to ourselves about what we long to possess, but cannot. What we long to possess, but cannot. And this could be lots of things. It could be a job, right? Your place of employment. You're going there, hanging out. You've worked there a number of years, and you find out that they're going to open up a new position, and they're going to hire internally. This is going to be a big promotion for somebody. And so you apply. You're encouraged to apply. A few other people are too, and you know that it's just between you and 2 other people. And you go in and you have that interview and you crush it. You knock it out of the park. You know they're going to offer you the position. Then you come to work the next day and you find out they offered it to Melissa instead. What? They offered it to Melissa? Have you seen her resume? I have way better experience for this job. Also, I've been here for almost a decade. Melissa's been here for 2 years. Why on earth would they give it to Melissa? And you know what? I didn't want that stupid job to begin with. It's a dumb promotion. Who wants to make an extra $30,000 a year anyway? That's stupid. It's all dumb. You start to lie to yourself. You just start to say, I didn't even want it to begin with. Or maybe it's a relationship. Say, I'd really like to ask that girl Melissa out. She's really smart and funny, and I hear she just got a new promotion. Maybe we should go talk to her a little bit. And so you go and you talk to Melissa, and Melissa says, I don't want to get involved with somebody at work, and we have to do the whole HR thing. And no, sorry, I'm just not interested. Melissa's stupid. I didn't want to date her anyway. You start writing those hate love letters, roses are red, violets are blue, your mother was pretty, what happened to you? That kind of stuff. You just write her off. I never wanted it in the first place. So you lie to yourself, you fake it. You can't possess it, and so you pretend you don't want it to begin with. Or we lie to ourselves about our anger toward other people. We do this a lot, actually. Why would we do that? Well, because it's uncomfortable to be mad at someone. Oftentimes, if we feel like if they knew that I was angry with them, they would think that was so petty, the reason I'm angry. So we kind of intuit that our reasoning behind it may not be great, but we don't want to be honest about it. Or we feel that we're very rightfully angry towards someone, but we just don't want to deal with the conflict. We don't want to have that conversation. We don't want to make things weird. We don't want to hurt the relationship. And so we fake it. We pretend like everything is fine. We push it down. We fake it to the person, but we start to fake it to ourselves. It's not really that big a deal that they did that. Or I really don't care much that they did that. We're just trying to get out of it any way we can. And so we lie to ourselves. For these reasons and many more, we tend to fake ourselves out, and it causes a mistrust of ourselves, which in turn leads to a mistrust of others. And oftentimes it misses out on a place where we could learn from what's happening inside of us, what's going on. We're going to look at a passage in the book of 2 Samuel in chapter 12 in just a moment. And I want to see in the life of one of the character studies in the Bible, someone who lied to themselves, faked themselves out, pretended that things were much better than they actually were. Israel had a king named David. David, this is the same David, if you know a little bit about some stories in the Old Testament, this is the same David who killed Goliath. He became the greatest king that Israel had had up until that point. Now, granted, Israel had only had one other king, but of the two, he was definitely the best. And so he stepped in to become the king, and he stepped in to protect the kingdom, and he stepped in to try to bring peace between the 12 tribes of Israel and everywhere. So David becomes king. He is lauded and loved throughout the empire of Israel because he has kept them safe, and he's a mighty warrior. And God even says that he's a man after my own heart. In fact, David ends up writing a lot of the Psalms, the worship songs that you'll find in the middle of an English Bible. Those Psalms were written, many of them were written by David. And so he's thought of exceedingly well. But when he's older, he has one of the most embarrassing stains on the history of his life and on the history of Israel. He ends up in a season when most kings are off to war, defending their country with the militaries that they lead. He ends up staying home. We're not told why. It seems like he should have been out with the army, but he decides not to go with the army. So he stays back, and he's walking around on the roof of his palace. And as he's looking from the roof of his palace out, he sees a young woman by the name of Bathsheba, a married young woman by the name of Bathsheba, who is bathing. So he sees her nude. And instead of saying like, oh, goodness, I shouldn't be looking at this, walking away, turning another eye, he longs for her, lusts after her. And so he sends people from the palace to go take Bathsheba and bring her back, and he sleeps with her. To be clear, this is a man with phenomenal power within the kingdom of Israel, calling on a woman with no power to come into his home, his palace, and to sleep with him. This is rape. David forces a woman with his power to sleep with him. She goes back home, and some weeks pass by, and she sends message to the king that she's pregnant. Her husband, Uriah the Hittite, has been out at battle with the armies protecting the nation, and so he has not been there to get her pregnant, which means it's definitely David's child. And because Uriah has been away for so long, David begins to fear that other people might find out that he had this woman sleep with him against her will as the king of the nation. So he concocts a plan. He's got to cover his tracks. He's got to make sure that no one discovers this. His plan is he sends for her husband, Uriah the Hittite, to come home from battle. And in his mind, what he thinks will happen is that Uriah will come home, will go in, and he hasn't seen his wife in many months, so he'll probably sleep with his wife. He'll have dinner with her, sleep in his own bed, and then he can send him back out to battle. And when Bathsheba gives birth, some 9-ish months from now, it'll look like it was Uriah's child. No one will know any different. Uriah comes home, but because Uriah is such an honorable man, he chooses not to go inside of his home and have a home-cooked meal and lay in his bed and sleep with his wife. He doesn't do any of that. He stays on the porch because he recognizes that his friends, the people who are serving the army with him, are out at war right now. And I refuse to live a peaceful, comfortable life here while my friends are out at war. So he sleeps on the front porch, and he doesn't go in. And he doesn't have a sexual relationship with his wife. And therefore, he is sent back out to battle, and David has gotten no progress on covering his tracks whatsoever. So David comes up with a different plan. He messages the commanders of the army, and he tells them, instructs them, to put Uriah the Hittite out front in the front lines where the fighting is fiercest, so that when Israel battles the Ammonites, Uriah the Hittite will die in battle. He'll be killed in battle. And that's exactly what happens. So then David looks like he is graciously, as the king, extending an invitation to the widow of Uriah, this poor woman who's lost her husband in battle, so that she can come and live in the palace and be one of David's wives and have David's children. He covers his tracks. And he somehow seems incapable of recognizing the amazing amount of evil that has taken place in his own life in order to make that happen. But God ends up using a prophet, Nathan, to confront him. And we pick the passage up in 2 Samuel chapter 12, where we read this part of the story. The Lord sent Nathan to David. And when he came to him, he said, there were 2 men in a certain town, one rich and the other poor. The rich man had a very large number of sheep and cattle, but the poor man had nothing except one little ewe lamb he had bought. And he raised it, and it grew up with him and his children. It shared his food, drank from his cup, and it even slept in his arms. It was like a daughter to him. In other words, this story that Nathan is telling David, there's these 2 men And all you need to know about them is that one man had everything and the other one had almost nothing. The one possession he owned and found valuable in the whole world was this small ewe lamb that he raised with his children, almost as one of his children. He loved this little lamb. Now, a traveler came to the rich man, but the rich man refrained from taking one of his own sheep or cattle to prepare a meal for the traveler who would come to him. So he's got all the sheep and cattle you can imagine, but instead of using one of his own, he makes a different decision. Instead, he took the ewe lamb that belonged to the poor man and prepared it for the one who would come to him. In other words, the rich guy who had everything took the one thing that this poor man had and used it for dinner to feed his guest. Well, David is outraged at this. And he believes that Nathan is coming to him with a story of something that has actually happened in the kingdom. It wasn't uncommon for kings to have to judge particular cases or to give their thoughts about particular trials that were happening within the kingdom. And so David responds with outrage. He's just furious. David burned with anger against the man, and he said to Nathan, "As surely as the Lord lives, the man who did this must die. He must pay for that lamb 4 times over because he did such a thing and had no pity." David is outraged and for some reason cannot see the parallels between what he did to Uriah the Hittite and Bathsheba and what this rich man did to this poor man. He understands justice. He understands holiness. He understands righteousness. But he's faked himself out. He has somehow lied to himself. He has somehow justified in his mind his own behavior and is unable to see that his behavior is this man's behavior. We do this a lot, by the way. We're really good at self-justification. So I don't know all that was going through David's mind, but I can imagine it looked to him similar that it does to us, and we're trying to figure out how it is that we're not really the bad guy in the story, even if we've done something bad, right? Cognitive dissonance. I got to figure out a way to wipe that away, to fake myself out. So from David's perspective, he's the king of all of Israel. He's stressed out all the time. In fact, David has to constantly protect the empire. David has to constantly bring peace among the 12 tribes. There's no one else who understands what it's like to be David. It's lonely at the top, right? And so for David, he's got to be thinking, look, I give and I give and I give to this nation. It's all I've ever done ever since I've been an adult. That's just what I've had to do. And so is it really so bad that every once in a while, from all of the hundreds of thousands, the millions of people who I serve, that every now and then I want to share an intimate moment with one of them? I want to invite someone into my life and into my room to bear a little bit of my struggle, and to fulfill me sexually. Is that such a horrible, bad thing? And then, yes, no one wanted her to get pregnant. I didn't want her to have my child. I felt terrible about that. I didn't want her to have to live with the scorn and the shame of that. And so I sent for her husband. Yes, I did. Because I wanted him to come back. I wanted him to be a part of this. I was even going to be okay for him to raise my own child. I would have been okay with that. I would have even told him that. Like, I would have let him raise him as his own in order that this family could get back to some kind of level of normalcy. But he wouldn't play ball. He goes back to the battlefield, and yes, I put him out front, but I didn't actually kill him. Our enemy, the Ammonites, killed him. That's how Uriah died. And it's unfortunate and it's sad that all of this took place, but none of it was so bad if you only just knew my heart behind it. David did what we do. We judge ourselves by our intentions and others by their behaviors. We start to say, but yeah, if you really knew what was underlying all that, you wouldn't judge me so harshly. But when we see other people exhibit the same behavior, we make the worst of assumptions. And so as Nathan confronts David, David is unable to see the parallels between his own story and his own actions and the actions of this imaginary rich man. And so David says, what? This man did what? He took the one possession that the poor man had? Well, he needs to be killed. And he needs to repay that 4 times what it cost. And Nathan confronts him and said, you are the man. It's you. This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says, David. I anointed you king over Israel, and I delivered you from the hand of Saul, and I gave your master's house to you and your master's wives into your arms. I gave you all Israel and Judah. And if all this had been too little, I would have given you even more. Why? did you despise the word of the Lord by doing what is evil in his eyes? You struck down Uriah the Hittite with the sword and took his wife to be your own. You killed him. You don't get to wash your hands of this. You don't get to say it was someone else. You don't get to say it was circumstantial. You killed him with the sword of the Ammonites. His blood is on your hands. Now, therefore, because you did this, the sword will never depart from your house, because you despised me and took the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your own. David has a choice to make in this moment. Does he choose to come face to face with his own sin and brokenness, or does he continue to lie to himself, to fake himself out, and to pretend like it's not a big deal? God is going to judge him. God is going to do that in the way that God typically judges, which is to just back off a bit, to abandon him. When the creator and sustainer of the world removes his presence, chaos ensues. Death and destruction ensues. But David has a choice to make. And what follows in the passages after this is some of the most tragic verses in all the Bible. His own son, David's own son, tries to rise up against him. This baby that was supposed to be born to Bathsheba ends up dying during birth and labor. Like it is sin that begets sin that begets sin. It is tragic. And the pathway of sin and darkness and destruction and broken relationships, all of that leads to a kind of death. And in this case, that's exactly what we see. The God of the universe says, if you don't want me here, I will step out. But that will lead to more darkness. And so David has a choice to make. And what we find is a psalm that he writes in the midst of the book of Psalms, where he actually talks about this incident and how sinful his heart was and how he needed God to forgive him. He recognized it for what it was. And this is the call, I think, of the scriptures. This is the call of Jesus in our lives, to recognize those things that are broken inside of us. To recognize them, to stop faking ourselves out and stop lying about it. Because if we long to look more like Jesus today than we did yesterday, and more like him tomorrow than we do today, the process of discipleship is one of constantly identifying the pieces of ourselves that are in need of transformation and healing, and surrendering those things to God. One way to think about it is to just say, you cannot rectify what you will not identify. If you want to start seeing transformation in your life, you have to be able to identify those things that need to be transformed. It's only then that transformation can start to happen, that you offering it to God on a consistent basis can start to happen. And so what I thought we might do is just spend a few minutes talking about what are some warning signs? What are some behaviors maybe that we exhibit that would show us, like, actually, there may be more underneath the surface than I'm realizing right now. It's some ways that we can start to think about it. So signs you may be faking it. Signs you may be lying to yourself. Just a few things, some behavioral things. First one, addiction. Addiction. And this can be substance addiction, or it can be behavioral addiction. So it could be drugs and alcohol. Sure, it could be that. It could be nicotine. It could be all kinds of things. Or it could be behavioral. It could be watching pornography, or compulsively checking Instagram or Facebook or our phones at all times of the day. And I know that doesn't seem like a big deal. If we're like, well, do you have an addiction? Do you have something that you do repeatedly? You're like, well, I check my phone a few times a day. Like, how many times? I don't know, like 742, something like that. Like, it's a few times. Well, why do you check it so much? I don't know. Like, have you ever been with a group of people and everybody's talking and you're like mindlessly like flipping through your phone? You haven't even thought about it. You didn't have a plan like, I will look through my phone now and find all the things. Like, you just started doing it. What's that about? Why are you disengaging? Why would you rather be staring at a screen than in this conversation that's happening right now? And I don't know the answer to that, and you may not either, but it's a good question to ask. Or why is it that I'm addicted to alcohol? Why do I long for that? Because usually the addiction is not about the thing you're addicted to. It's usually a mask that you're using to not think about something. It's a balm that we're trying to soothe ourselves with, but only to find out that its effects, its impact, any kind of positivity, it lasts for a moment, and then it's gone. And so if you have an addiction in your life, whatever that might be, behavioral or substance, like this may be a sign that you're faking it. That there's something inside of you that you need to deal with, something inside of you that needs to be healed that you haven't seen be healed yet. Another one, manic cheeriness. Have you ever met someone who's just like over the top cheery all the time? they're just like, hey, how you doing? How you doing? Oh, you're doing well? Excellent. So glad. Oh, how am I? Oh, I'm excellent. Oh, I'm so excellent. We had such an excellent week. What did we do? Oh, we did so many things. Like, what were they specifically? They were awesome. They were just all awesome. Every last one of them was just full of awesome. Tuesday was rad. Thursday was fantastic. Friday was awesome. And then Saturday was kababunga. It was just great all the way through. It was so good. Why is it that people get over the top cheery like that? Now, again, we all get really excited. Sometimes our sports team wins. Sometimes we score that free ticket to the game that we wanted, or that free ticket to Disneyland, or whatever. There's a reason to have times where we're very happy. But if you're the kind of person that is always 10 out of 10 on cheeriness, there's a chance that there's something in your life that you're not dealing with, and you are using your cheeriness to mask it. There's a chance. I met a woman a few years ago who was just like over the top, excited about everything all the time. And one of her friends asked me afterwards, they were like, how did you enjoy her name? And I said, well, she seems really nice. Is everything okay? I've not seen someone with that much boundless energy all the time. And she said, oh no, that's just her. That's just the way she is. And I was like, okay, great. I mean, I'm glad to know that. I'd known her for a couple of years, and then I found out that actually she had been abused as a child and had a very difficult relationship with her family of origin, and that was the reason that she was cheery all the time. She was pretending that everything was always great all the time, because the moment things stopped being always great all the time, her mind would go into dark places as she would think about the past. And I'm not saying that had an easy, simple solution, that she needed to get into therapy and counseling and work through that and talk through that and pray through that. But she began to see her manic cheeriness as a sign that perhaps not everything is going well. On the flip side of that, manic anger or irritation. Here's what I know, guys. If you want to be angry all the time, you can be. There is always something to be angry about. In fact, the world is full. It's full of people. And people do irritating, annoying, awful things to each other all the time, even when they're not trying to. And so there's always something that you can be angry about. Some people see all the injustice in the universe in a 20-minute traffic delay, right? That's all it takes. It's just, it's just everything. So angry, so upset. But if you're angry all the time, there may be something underneath the surface. If you can't stop watching cable news all the time because you just love it when they fight, there may be something inside of you that you're looking to soothe or to think through. And this is the other thing about anger, and this is important. Anger equals unmet expectations plus fear. Anger equals unmet expectations plus fear. And we could probably dissect every one of these, but I just want to spend a little bit of time here. There's a great book that came out a few years ago by an author named James Bryan Smith, and it's called The Good and Beautiful God. And he has a couple of follow-ups to that. But in one of those follow-ups, he talks about anger and unpacks it a little bit. And he gives a great example of why anger is unmet expectations. Now, you get here, right? Unmet expectations, that can be frustrating. But you add fear to it, and then that makes you angry. So the example he gives, I think, is a helpful one. Let's say that you agreed to meet someone for lunch at 12 o'clock to have a lunch together, just as a friend, to have a great time. Let's say it's at the Corner Bakery. That's close to here, close to Inland Hills. So you go to the Corner Bakery, you're supposed to meet someone at noon. So 12 o'clock, you're there at 11:55 because you're just a punctual person. That's just who you are. And you're in the corner, you're reading a book, and 12 o'clock rolls around, your friend's not there. 12:05, still not there. 12:10, not there. 12:15, not there. Finally shows up at 12:20. Now, for most of us, if that happened, we would be frustrated, irritated, wish you were here earlier, didn't like waiting that long. That could be a response. But for some of us, that would send us beyond irritated. That would send us to anger. We would be very, very angry. So what's the difference? The difference is that if all you have is unmet expectations, you said you'd be here at 12, you didn't get here till 12:20, then that's irritating. It's frustrating. You waste of time. But you add fear into that, and then you start to get angry. And what does fear look like in a situation like that? Well, let's say 12 o'clock rolls around, they're not there. 12:05. And you start to think, why is it that they are always late when we decide to get together? Now, it could just be that they're not a punctual person, or that traffic was, there could be any number of things, right? But you start to wonder, why is it that they're always late? And then you start to think around 12:10, I'm always on time, and they're not. Do they just not enjoy spending time with me as much as I enjoy spending time with them, 12:15 rolls around. I have made a priority today to be here on time because I care about them. It feels like they don't care about me because they haven't prioritized this. 12:17, 12:18, 12:19. As the minutes click by, you start thinking like, they don't even care. They don't even think much about me. Like I feel like this is a great friendship, but it turns out they're not feeling like we're great friends. And by 12:20, when they show up, you have gone from frustration and unmet expectations to adding fear that they actually don't care about you, which speaks to all kinds of concerns you have about your own identity and your own self-worth. And as you've added that in, you've gone from frustration to being furious. When you add unmet expectations with fear, fury is a natural response. So for many of us, what we need to do in order to really unpack this and understand why are we angry all the time, we need to figure out what is it that I'm afraid of. Right? Unmet expectations happen constantly, but what am I afraid of? What is the thing behind the thing that's causing me to be angry a lot of times? And that is a great way to start thinking through your own anger. Defensiveness. Sometimes you get highly defensive, right? Defensiveness. Someone tries to give you some criticism or some help, and instead of being able to take what's helpful and kind of discard what's not, you just get really defensive. You can't even hear even helpful critique. Why is that? Well, there may be something more than that. You may be faking yourself out on that. Cynicism. Cynicism is tough because cynicism often presents itself as a kind of wisdom when it's actually a wound. Cynicism presents itself as like, well, you've been here before. I've seen how people treat people. I've seen that companies don't care. I've seen that the government's inept. I've seen this. I've seen that. I've seen this. That sounds really wise. But what people aren't telling you is, I've been burned by people a whole bunch, and I've been burned by companies a whole bunch, and I've been burned by the government a whole bunch, and we're getting to a place where I just don't trust anybody anymore. It sounds like wisdom, but it's a wound. And if that wound never heals, a person can find themselves being cynical their entire lives. And if you're a very, very cynical person, you may be lying to yourself about some things. What you think is cynicism may actually be a deep hurt that needs to be healed. And finally, belittlement. Belittlement. This is the idea that we talked about before, right? Writing things off. Like, I didn't want that in the first place. I didn't want to date that person in the first place. That thing's actually not that good. I can't have it. I can't possess it, so I'm just going to discard it. And if you're someone who flips back and forth constantly on what you think is awesome versus what you think is terrible, this could be something that you struggle with a bit. Now, these are all some signs that you might be faking it. There's plenty more. It's not an exhaustive list. But the whole idea here is that you're constantly searching your entire heart, and you're constantly open to the possibility that your heart is not in quite as good a condition or shape as you hoped it would be. You're just open to that. In your prayer life, you're asking God to sift you, to know your heart, to reveal anything in you that doesn't align with who he's called you to be. So these are the kinds of, you may lie to yourself about stuff through all these different ways, but there's another kind of lie that I think is important too, and we'll hit that and then we'll be done. There's another lie that says, not that I have it all together when I really don't. This kind of lie is almost the flip of that. It's the lie that I'm not good enough to have, to be loved, or someone's care for me is based solely on whether I'm able to achieve or to accomplish. It's the lie that God can't possibly deal with my past, and so why even come to Jesus because I've had such a messed up life? It's a lie that says God doesn't really love me. Jesus was invited to dinner with a Pharisee, a religious leader of his day, named Simon. And as Jesus came to dinner, a woman showed up at the dinner who was a prostitute. And this prostitute sees Jesus and is moved by Jesus. She apparently came seeking him out because she comes carrying with her really expensive perfume, like a year's worth of salary, expensive perfume. And she kneels at his feet, and she weeps onto his feet and washes the dust off of his feet with her hair, and then anoints his feet with this perfume, and she kisses his feet. And the question being, why would she do this? Why is she moved in this way by Jesus? And if you're a prostitute in the first century, frankly, if you're a prostitute now, there are two looks that you're used to receiving from men. The first look is one of lust, one of objectifying you and wanting to partake in your physicality, wanting to be gratified by you sexually. That's one look. And you can start to feel subhuman, less than when people look at you all the time. But another look that's equally as strong that you receive just as often is one of judgment and condemnation. People not understanding why on earth you would choose the path that you have, and therefore not wanting to have anything to do with you. So some people despise you, and therefore they judge you, and some people long for you, and therefore they lust after you. But all of it's conditional on the choices you've made. And then it seems at some point along the way, she meets Jesus. We don't know where, we don't know what it looked like. Perhaps it was when he was healing others, perhaps he was just teaching. But he looks at her in a way that no one else does. He doesn't look at her with lust, and he doesn't look at her with condemnation. He looks on her with love as he looked on everyone. There's a graciousness to his eyes, an understanding. And so when she has the opportunity to bless him, she chooses to bless him. She's going to show up. She's going to do everything she can to let him know how meaningful that has been. But the people who are there at the dinner, as this woman is fawning over Jesus and trying to pour all this perfume out on Jesus, they know that she's a prostitute, and they don't like this. So Simon the leper, the Pharisee there who's watching this play out, he does not like it. He begins to think to himself. When the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would know who is touching him and what kind of woman she is, that she is a sinner. Like, I'm not sure this guy's even on the up and up. It's obvious who this lady is. What does he think? What does he think he's doing? And this is what I love. He said this to himself, right? He's thinking this to himself. The next verse, Jesus answered him. How creepy would that be, right? Just sitting at dinner with Jesus, in your mind, you're thinking about something, and then Jesus just looks at you, and he's like, dude, the Mavs are not making the playoffs this year. Like, don't even worry about it. Like, hey, first of all, that's offensive, and secondly, get out of my head. Jesus answered him, Simon, I have something to tell you. Tell me, teacher, he said. Notice that Jesus, when he wants to give Simon some truth, uses a story. And when Nathan wanted to lead David into the truth, he gave him a story. Two people owed money to a certain moneylender. One owed him 500 denarii and the other 50. Neither of them had the money to pay him back, so he forgave the debts of both. Now, which of them will love him more? And Simon replied, I suppose the one who had the bigger debt forgiven. You have judged correctly, Jesus said. And then he turned toward the woman and said to Simon, do you see this woman? I came into your house. You did not give me any water for my feet, but she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You did not give me a kiss, but this woman, from the time I entered, has not stopped kissing my feet. You did not put oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my feet. Therefore, I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, as her great love has shown. But whoever has been forgiven little loves little. In other words, like, you don't even know what it's like to be forgiven the amount that I'm forgiving her. And what I'm seeing from you is that you're loving very little right now. You can't even love this woman who's in front of you. And then Jesus said to her, your sins are forgiven, which is not something that rabbis in the first century said. They didn't have the authority to forgive sins. And so people start to talk. The other guests began to say among themselves, who is this who even forgives sins? And Jesus said to the woman, your faith has saved you. Go in peace. What Jesus reminds us of in this passage is the other kind of lie that we tell ourselves, this lie that we're not good enough to be loved by God, or we're not good enough to come to Christ, or somehow our past or things that we've done, mistakes we've made, prohibit us from being welcomed fully into God's kingdom. And Jesus just reminds us that those of us who have sinned much have been forgiven much. Those of us who have been forgiven much will love much. And so for some of us, we need to really examine our hearts and recognize that we have brokenness there, and we need healing of that brokenness. A few years ago, I was, my son, Jack, he's 6 now, he was 2 at the time, and we were headed to the airport. It was Christmas time, so we were going to fly to Texas to see family that we had living there. And we're in the car, and we're running late. And I had grown up with a number of male role models who I looked up to a lot, who were fantastic people. And if you ever met them, you'd be very impressed with them. But they had road rage, like unbelievable amounts of road rage. So you got in the car with them, and they were like, at first scary, but then it just got funny. And like I had been taught, not explicitly, but implicitly, that real men get road rage. And so when I became 16 years old and I got my driver's license, I drove angry. And it didn't help that my friends also thought it was funny, and so it just kind of fed that behavior. And so if I would have a traffic delay, if somebody would do something stupid, which people do all the time, myself included, like I would just get angry, furious about it. And so a few years ago, I'm driving on the way to the airport. We left the house late. And if anger is unmet expectations plus fear, I thought we would leave on time. We didn't, unmet expectation. And then I was afraid we were going to miss our flight. And apparently in my mind, missing our flight was the same as the world ending. I don't know why I was so afraid of it, but that was it. I was so angry. And so I pull on the road, and if everything goes just right, we'll probably be able to make it with just a little bit of time to spare. And the first thing I do is get behind Grandma Grump as she's putt into some store. And what did I say? Did I do the Jesus thing? God bless you, Grandma Grump. No. I said, Grandma Grump, get off the road with your big white hair and your big Cadillac. You can't even drive that thing. Come on. She didn't hear any of this, but this is what I'm yelling in the car, right? I'm very kind to people's faces. So we're driving down the road, and finally I realize we get close to the airport and I need gasoline. And so I'm not going to make it to the airport. So I pull over and I'm mad about that. And then all the pumps have other cars at it. The station never had that. And there's one car that I parked behind. I think they're done. And then they finish pumping, and this lady takes her chihuahua so he can go poop in the grass. And I'm like, move your car. Finally, I get in there and I start to pump up, and I'm just so upset and angry. I start hitting the side of the automobile out of just anger and rage. And in the midst of that moment, by the grace of God, I was able to just for a minute take a step back and look at my behavior as if I were looking at someone else. And I realized how absolutely stupid I looked. And I just started thinking through this as the gas is going into the vehicle. I can't get us there a second faster by being this upset and this angry. And I have probably scared my 2-year-old, who I wasn't thinking about at all, and I am sure that I have frustrated and embarrassed my wife. It's not okay. So I got back in the car, and I apologized to my wife. And I apologized to my 2-year-old, who I do not think understood me, but I apologized to him anyway. Now, do I still get frustrated in traffic sometimes? Yes. Also, it's hilarious that God moved us to Southern California. Sure, I still get frustrated in traffic sometimes. But I never behaved like that again. Because I was having such a big reaction, it ended up being a signpost for me. There is something not right here. And it was about a desire for control. It was about fear. It was about all kinds of stuff. And I had to work through that. Some of us need to find those signposts and examine our hearts and recognize where there is brokenness and we need God to heal it. Some of us need to believe the truth that whatever we've done in the past is forgiven if we just bring it to Jesus. That God loves us an infinite amount, and that no matter what the world around you has told you about you, you are infinitely loved by God. And as we begin to take more and more steps toward his truth and toward his righteousness and towards becoming the kinds of people he's called us to, the world around us gets blessed by the followers of Jesus and the lives that they live. Father, thanks for the time together today. Lord, we love you. Lord, we just ask that you continue to walk alongside of us, to encourage us, to examine our own hearts. Lord, test what's inside of us. Anything that's impure, anything that's not aligning with who you are, Lord, would you just reveal that to us? Lord, help us to understand that we cannot rectify what we will not identify, that we need to have our attention called to those things, Lord, and in doing so, to become more and more like you today than we were yesterday, more and more like you tomorrow than we are today. And may the world around us be blessed as we increasingly live the life you've called us to. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thank you so much for watching this message. It is our hopes that it encourages you and uplifts you in the week ahead. We also invite you to join us at one of our Sunday services here at 9, 11, or 5 p.m. Thank you for watching, and we hope to see you here soon.